Hi friends, hi, hello, how are you today? Happy Monday and a happy new palette roulette video in which I review a palette. Last week, for the first time, I chose the palette my dang self, and I'm super happy to come to you with the review I have on this palette. For the most part, you all thought that this was a great idea, so I think that I'll be choosing a palette myself for the interim. Anyways, I might shoot back to the app at some point in time. I have been taking the palettes that I choose, or this palette that I chose, out. I will continue to do so that my app stays current with the palettes that I am bringing in or taking out of my collection or utilizing through Palette Roulette already, so that we don't see any kind of like duplicate palette roulette. But with that said, this is a series that I started here on my channel really just to utilize the palettes that I have in my collection, because I am a palette hoarder. So if you are also a palette hoarder, hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Donna. So happy that you found me. Super happy to have you here today. I do hope that you like me or my channel enough that you'll consider subscribing before you go. Please don't forget to hit the notification bell if you do that, so that I show up in your feed. I am the channel for you if you are, into colorful beauty, self-care, over 40, you enjoy colorful eye looks, you enjoy treating yourself, and you enjoy doing what everybody tells you that you're not supposed to do, and you need a partner in crime. I will be that person supporting you through every avenue of everything that you want to do, because I want to make sure you have a voice too. With that said, let's jump into it. Today is the palette roulette for the Natasha Denona Triochrome Palette. This palette was her holiday release last year, so it did come out in the end of October. I didn't purchase it. I wasn't going to purchase it. I was like, nope, this is not the palette for me. This is not the Natasha Denona palette for me. I've done that in the past. I still end up with the dang palettes, to be honest. And the truth of the matter is I didn't purchase this palette. I did get it for Christmas. My better half, he bought it for me for Christmas, and I couldn't be more grateful that it landed in my lap, because I probably wouldn't have purchased it, and I enjoyed every moment of time that I had with it over this last week. So this is what the palette is. This is what it looks like, and the exterior of the palette is one of the hard cases that she started doing with her MIDI palettes. So the 15 shade smaller pan palettes. Her 15 pans usually come in like a leather case with like foam to it. I do have to say that this looks a bit more luxe. It feels a little bit more luxe, but I did like those palettes as well. What I love most about these palettes is that the palettes feel a little bit more protected, but also the names are on the palette, so that we see the shade names on the palette, whereas they weren't on the previous $129 version of her palettes, which is what this comes in at. So this is, again, what the palette looks like. It does have a little bit of a multichromal effect to the case itself. The front of the palette just says Natasha Denona Triochrome Palette, and the back of it looks like this. These holes are so that you can pop out the pans that are magnetic and put them into a magnetic palette that is larger if you don't want to keep the casing for each one of the pans. I've never myself popped out the pans, rearranged the palette, or popped out the pans and put them into a smaller magnetic palette by any means. I like keeping my palettes into their original contents. I do feel like my singles don't get as much use as my palettes do, but I feel like once they go into like single shadow form, I maybe don't touch them as much, which is part of the reason why I struggled to purchase some of the single pan eyeshadow that I want.
Hello, Cleona. Yes, I'm talking to you, Cleona.
When you open it up, it does have a nice size mirror, and then these are the shadows. You guys can see I damaged it a little bit. I dropped it today while I was recording a portion of this eye look to put into this video for you, so that you could see how easily they apply. And man, my fingernail just went right through it. I still have remnants of that scarab shade in my fingernail that I cannot get out. So if it looks like I have dirty fingernails, I promise you it's just these shades. I actually scarred this one pretty badly. I scarred this one and this one as well, and I almost cried. that's how tragic this was for me. But it's just an eyeshadow palette. It's just an eyeshadow palette. So again, this is $129. It does have 0.08 ounces per pan in here. So that comprises of 1.2 ounces of product for the palette in entirety. It does come in at 3.8 stars on Sephora with 77 reviews. It comes in at 4.0 stars on Beautylish with 11 reviews. And it comes in at 4.2 stars on Google with 150 reviews. I do think I would probably put it into a 4.4, 4.5 star rating, and the biggest determining factor for me would be these three Triochromes here, and we'll get into that in a minute. But I love her mattes. Her mattes are beautiful, and they blend beautifully. They work beautifully with each other and with other shades. I don't really have anything poor to say about the mattes in this palette, and I'm glad that this palette comprises itself of 12 of those matte shades. And what I have to say are these are shades that I don't really think that I have elsewhere in my collection. So I was really happy to have this as a unique complementary but also a standalone palette in my collection. This whole eye look was done solely from the mattes in this palette. I wanted to make sure that I could come to you guys with an eye look using multiple different facets of the mattes in this palette to show you how well they work together and how well they all look in the same eye look regardless of which row you're pulling from, because you can notice that this one is largely green row, this one is a largely purple row, and this one is a largely like orange row, right? This was a limited edition palette. It's still for sale. I don't know how long it will be for sale. I know that the Love palette was also a limited edition palette, and it is still for sale. As long as they keep selling, I think she keeps them on board. I have no doubt in my mind that this one will be one that continues to be up for sale for quite some time. There are 15 shades in here, as you saw. As I said, 12 of them are mattes and 3 of them are what she calls her multi-chromes. I will go ahead and link my palette roulette playlist down in my description box. It's always there. Please, if you have any interest in any other Natasha Denona palette, I have several in my collection. All 3 of those shelves there, Natasha Denona palette. I have done one of these on many of those palettes, so please go check those out. These shadows, not unlike any other Natasha Denona eyeshadow palette, perform really well with or without a primer. I think that they go on your bare skin pretty consistently with how they also go onto your skin with a primer. The caveat to that is I would say if you are going to use a primer, you will want to make sure that that primer is a drier form of a primer, or set the primer before you put the shadows on top of them. They're very pigmented, they're very opaque, and they're going to like stick to anything that is wet, and that is where they're going to stay. They're not going to be very forgiving to you if that primer is wet. But I think that you can get away with not using a primer with any Natasha Denona shadow, in my opinion. I wouldn't call myself a Natasha Denona like subject matter expert, but I do have so many of her palettes. If there was a brand that I wholeheartedly wanted to make sure I got every single thing of, there might be a couple, and hers would be on the top of the list if I'm honest. That information that I just gave you about the primer is pretty categorically the same for every single one of her eyeshadow palettes. These last a good 10 to 12 hours on your skin. I did have mine on yesterday. Actually, I fell asleep on the couch, which I quite often do, honestly. And the eye look was still on my eye the next day. What I would say about that is that the multi-chrome is going to look completely different after a certain amount of hours, especially the 2 like more purple in tone ones, so Kinetic and Color Flip. Those 2, you can see more of the baseline for those multi-chromes towards that like 10 to 12 hour mark and beyond than you can the actual like shiftiness of it. The mattes here felt different than many of her other creamy matte formulas, like maybe a little bit thinner, but they still performed very, very well. They still went on very, very opaque. They still, for the most part, the lighter tones, of course, are a little bit more semi-opaque, but I still feel like they performed quite well and packed on easily. And the video that I have that you should be seeing probably around this time shows just the ease of use of making sure that these colors go on really well and they translate from palette to your eye the same shade. And there just isn't a whole lot of finagling that you have to do with an eye look. One of my favorite things about Natasha Denona shadows is that I don't have to work for 5 hours to get an eye look like this and make it happen in the way I want it to happen. It is so easy to use her shadows. You don't have to do much. And with that said, I would say that it would even be easy for a beginner to use as long as the beginner understands that you don't need to go in super heavy-handed. So if the beginner is using like a Morphe palette where you might have to dig into the shadow a little bit differently, these shadows you don't have to. They're going to go on exactly how you want them to go on the first time. You don't have to spend 4 hours to get a crazy intricate eye look. And with that said, the mattes are also, because they felt a little bit different, I feel like they were a lot more powdery in the pan than I have seen Natasha Denona shadows be in the past. But that didn't translate a whole lot to the eye look. I know that there was some kick up in the pan that did translate to my face, but I found it with the darker shadows, and I think that that is probably the same for many other palettes out there that have, you know, a good amount of fallout, is you're going to see it more with the darker shadows. I did see it more with the darker green and the darker purple in this palette than I did with any other shade in this palette. And I didn't see any fallout whatsoever with the lighter tones, but that could just be because they are lighter in tone. Natasha Denona does have a slight bit of fallout with her shadows, but that has never been a make or break moment for me. My suggestion, if it is for you, is to do your eyes first. And I just love it so much more because I can use those highly pigmented, beautiful blendable shadows that do have fallout without the frustration. The Triochromes in this palette, so while I wouldn't say that they're sad, I would say that they're lackluster. I don't know if you can tell, but there's not a whole lot of shiftiness to them. I did take a video that I'll pop up in here of me doing an eye look the other day. I am using this bottom Triochrome here called Color Flip. I just don't know, you can see it, but it is very subtle. Like when I think of multi-chrome, I think of like Clionadh Cosmetics. I want those multi-chromes so dang bad because in every picture you see, like you can see the shiftiness of those. With these, you can't. I would say that the one that shifted the best was this one here. That one I think has the most flip, and I think that you can actually see that in the pictures that I took, that I'm using that green all over my lid. But I would say that they're also more duochrome than they are multi-chrome. Like even this purple, this one right here, I couldn't see much of a flip at all, and if I did see a flip, it was just duochromatic and not multichromatic. And then the color flip one down at the bottom, it shifted. You could see it shift, but it shifted more to one color of taupe to another. So while I wouldn't say that they were awful, I would say that they're lackluster. They are very pretty. They're not the multi-tone that I would think that Natasha Denona is capable of, to be honest. Let's look at some swatches. I am going to go green row, then purple row, then orange row, and we'll just go through this. I wanted to note too, before I moved on, that the palette doesn't bend all the way back like her leather ones do, but it is able to, you can like adjust it to stand up at any angle that you want it to, or lay flat. I appreciate that a lot. You just can't bend it all the way back. So some people like that, some people don't. I would also say that the mirror, I feel like isn't super secure in here. Like it's bouncy, which is weird to me. And I do love the packaging on this palette. Let's start with the first row here. These are all the greens in that first row. So we do have, to start, we have Scrap, which is her creamy matte, and this is a dark, like olive green. It is a beautiful shade, and it goes really well in any eye look. I even put it on top of a purple, and it looked just fantastic in that eye look. I loved this shade. It was one of my favorites to use, and it is one of the deeper ones in the palette, so it's really great for that outer V, deepening up any eye look. And then we have this one here, which is called Androdite. This shade is a really light tone minty green. It is on my inner corner and my brow bone today. It really just brings something different to an eye look without like being scary different, if that makes any sense. The next shade is the first of the multi-chromes, and it is Scarab. In the screen, I am seeing it, I believe, as you are, and it looks very like golden, but this is actually a really bright chartreuse that shifts golden and also shifts emerald green. So I'm not sure that you guys are seeing all the shiftiness. Again, as I said, these Triochromes are a little bit more on the subtle side. This is the most shifty of the shades, and this is also the most sheeny of the shades. So you're going to get the biggest punch with this shade here as far as the multi-chromes in this palette go. The next shade in that top row is Ion. Ion is a bright chartreuse matte. This will translate as yellow in mini and eye look. It is in my eye look today. It does translate as yellow in my eye look today. I do think that if you wanted to pack it on, and if you are more pale and less yellow, it will translate as a chartreuse on you. On a yellow or maybe even a medium toned person, it's going to maybe translate as a yellow. That is what it translates to on my skin. And then the last shade in that top row is Vert, and it is a mustard green matte. It is a really pretty mustard green. I love that shadow. I love green. This is the next row in that palette. So this is the purple row, and the first shade in that one is Naga. Naga is a cool toned lavender shade. It is in my eye look today. It is all over my lid, and it's such a pretty lavender shade. Again, it's like that minty green one. It packs a little bit of a punch in an eye look without packing too much of a punch. If you are a person who wants to dabble in color but doesn't want to dabble in color, this is probably a good palette for you because it has those lighter tones of color. And then we have this one here, which is called Manganese, and this was probably my most used shadow in this palette. I love this shade. It also is in my eye look in the outer V. I also blended it into the crease and almost into the inner portion of my eye look here. It is a really pretty, just burgundy toned purple, and it's just so, so pretty. And then we have the second of the multi-chromes, and this one is called Kinetic. This one is slated as a purple that shifts to fuchsia that shifts to olive. I find it to be more of a like indigo, like blue lavender, shift to purple, shift to fuchsia is where I found it to be. It dulls very, very quickly. This one I think lasted maybe a good 6 hours on my eyes before I saw the shiftiness of it go away. It also isn't necessarily the shiniest of the bunch. It is shiny. It does appear shiny on my hand. It swatches very well. I would say it plays differently in an eye look, and it's a beautiful shade. I do love it. It's just not what I would have anticipated from a Natasha Denona multi-chrome. This one is called Redux, and it is like a grayish purple. It is very cool tone, obviously, and it is lighter in the pan than what it appears on your skin. It gets very deep in an eye look very quickly, which I know can be true of some Natasha Denona shadows, but not often are her shadows in the pan different than they appear on the eyes. They translate almost exactly what they were in the pan almost every single time. So it's not often that that happens, but this one in particular is a lot lighter in the pan than it is on your eye. And then the last one in the purple row is that one, and that is Tungsten, and Tungsten is just a pinky mauve matte. That whole row is mostly cool tone shades. These are the last 5 in the palette, and the first one we have is on my thumb, and it is called Vertex. It's just a beige matte. It goes really well into a crease. If you're a lighter to medium skin tone, I would say that this is really great also in an inner corner or your brow bone, just to create some differentiation. I used it a lot to blend out a shadow. I also used it a lot to set my eyeshadow primer. The next one is this one. This is Plutonium. This is a yellow-orange matte. This is in my eye look as well. It is right there on top. You guys can see it. In my eye look, I do love the shadow. I do love a good orange on my eyes. Final Triochrome is this guy here. And this guy's shade name is Color Flip. And it is listed as a color flip from plum to olive to green. I really feel like it's more of a taupey plum to taupey green to taupe. I don't feel like this one flips hardly at all. Can you guys see the flip there? That is supposedly the olive green, but it looks more like taupe. It's just taupe. And when this one starts to fade away, it is just a taupe shimmer in your eye look. This is the one that I fell asleep in, that I woke up to this morning, that was a completely different color than what it was when I fell asleep. It's also the one I believe I was wearing when I took the video and showed you the shift. Let me know what you guys think of that shift, because I just don't think that this one shifts hardly at all. It also isn't as shiny as the other two. This one has the lesser amount of sheen than the other in all of the multi-chromes in this palette. The next shade in that row is this one here, and it is called Garmin, and it is just a plummy brown. And then the last shade in the palette is this one here, and this one is called Diatonic. This one does feel a little bit wonky in the pan. It does have a little bit of a grippiness to it. But it is still a beautiful coral. I did use it to help blend out my eye look today, from that purple to the orange, just to like cater a little bit more to the oranginess than the purpliness. These are the shadows in that palette. I do feel like they are very consistent. I feel like they are consistent with Natasha Denona shadows, even though the mattes feel a little bit more thin than many Natasha Denona matte. I do feel like they are pretty consistent with how they perform for Natasha Denona, and I'm not unhappy that I have this palette in my collection. It's weird to have shadows that I'm not necessarily disappointed with, but I know that she probably could have done better, if that makes any sense. So with that said, I'm not unhappy that I have this palette. I am actually super happy I have this palette, and I'm super proud of my man who has no idea what he's doing when it comes to makeup. His purchase of this, like, I was shocked. I honestly did not for 2 seconds believe that this would be what was underneath my tree. I'm very, very sad that I did this to this eyeshadow palette. Do I think that you need to pay $129 for this palette? Probably not. If you have mattes in these tones, then you probably don't. Because I am the person I am, I don't necessarily think that these mattes are in my collection. So I am happy to have these mattes in my collection because I don't like pastel colors. So these are extraordinary shades in my palette collection. I am really happy to have those multi-chromes. I think these are the first multi-chromes that I have in my collection. However, I do know that there are better multi-chromes out there. I don't know that I would repurchase this palette for $129. One thing I would say about this too is that in her $129 palettes that have like the foam and the leather, I never felt like my shadows were at risk of falling out. But in this one, I will tell you, can you guys see that pan moving? Granted, this is magnetic. My pans are probably safe, but it's weird to me that happens like that, because I've never had that experience with a Natasha Denona palette before. With that said, I am going to choose the next palette to use. The next palette that I will be utilizing through my palette roulette is the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. I have used this palette, but like the Triochrome, I've only used a couple shades in here. So I've used this one here, and I've also used this one here. But that is it. That is all I have used in this. So this is pretty ordinary, not super extraordinary. I am super excited to use a few of these shades though, and I do think that I'll get a lot of great looks can come out of this palette. So I am super excited to be coming to you with this one next week. I hope that you are also excited, and I promise you the week after that we will not do another Natasha Denona palette. I just want to get some usage out of these before I pull them from my Shop My Stash, which they've been in for 4 months now. So with that being said, I do hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you're considering subscribing to my channel if you're not already. And I also hope that you'll give it a big thumbs up. You know, hey, if you want to stick around and watch another one, YouTube will be suggesting one to you in a couple short seconds. With that said, what palette are you using in your palette a week or palette a month or whatever it is that you're doing? I'd be interested to know. And yeah, you guys, that's all I got for you. I hope that you are keeping you and yours safe and healthy, and that you're loving each other, but loving each other from afar. And until next time, bye friends.